Hello, everybody. How are you today? Thank you for tuning in. I am your instructional co-host, Dr. Scott Petrie, and today we are going to be talking about using writing tasks to elicit adolescents' historical reasoning. This is another wonderful piece of research that has come out of the history instructional world. It was started by Chauncey Monte-Sano and it was co-authored by Susan de la Paz. This was part of a large $1.5 million grant that was investigating disciplinary writing instruction in the social studies classroom. I am pleased. I will do a great disservice in trying to summarize it, but nonetheless, I will summarize it, and I will also direct you to the blog at the end of this, and I will provide the document for your reading this week. So, this scholarship looks at how different writing tasks encourage historical reasoning. And what they've realized is that scholars don't know the influence of the types of assignments on student writing or historical reasoning. Historical reasoning is defined as analyzing evidence, understanding the meaning of evidence, and using evidence to construct and explain plausible accounts of the past. So the key question is, do all argumentative tasks provide students with the same opportunity to develop their historical thinking or writing? Are some ways of framing questions to promote historical thinking and writing better than others? And can the structure of a writing prompt influence student outcomes? This study suggests yes, and that the type of task explains 31%, almost a third, of the variance in the quality of student responses. So, much of the research on history writing has focused on how students draw on multiple sources in constructing essays. Some attention has been given to comparing argumentative writing and comparison to other genres such as narratives, summaries, and explanations. However, almost zero research has been done on what we ask students to write and how that affects their thinking and writing. So, developing arguments, writing is often complicated by patterns of thinking and working with evidence. The use of evidence indicates aspects of disciplinary reasoning, including recognizing biases in sources, comparing evidence, situating evidence in its context, and historical interpretations that rely on the public display of evidence to substantiate claims. For instance, a claim cannot stand without evidence. So these authors administered 4 DBQs, document-based writing tasks, on the origin of the Cold War to about 101 students in the 10th and 11th grade. So we talked a little bit about historical perspective, how students have skills in recognizing and reconciling historical perspectives, and these skills significantly improved with writing tasks that asked them to engage in the analysis, the sourcing, the corroboration, and the cause and effect analysis. Now, in defining some of these, whoops, I'm getting ahead of myself here. Let's talk a little bit about historical argumentation. Tolman has a framework that is very well thought of in academia, and it lays out the key aspects of writings: claim, data, warrant, counterclaim. These components apply in most disciplines: English, science, math, and history. So, historical reasoning, we talked about earlier, it involves reading and writing about sources from the perspectives of those who created it and placing those sources into historical context. So Sam Weinberg identified several discipline-specific ways of reading and thinking. And for historians, primary sources are regarded as excerpts of social interactions. So they have to be reconstructed with context added to make the documents meaningful. Providing writing prompts that require close reading and consideration of the author's perspective supports historical thinking and greater understanding. So perhaps the structure and the focus of the writing prompt actually does affect the quality of the student's historical reasoning. So these researchers wanted to find out how this happened. So to do that, they created 4 reading and writing tasks that use the same documents. and they randomly assigned one task to each student. Each task presented the same background information that was adapted from the social studies textbook. They worded each prompt differently to frame the issue of the Cold War causes from a variety of historical angles. The situated prompt encouraged students to imagine that they'd heard these speeches and they should write as if they were living in 1947. The sourcing prompt encouraged students to focus on the motivations of each author in making their respective speeches. The document analysis prompt encouraged students to identify similarities and differences in the documents. And the causal prompt asked students why Winston Churchill and Harry Truman spoke out against the Soviet Union and communism directly. So, I think I just explained all that. There it is. Sorry, I should have put that up on the screen earlier, but feel free to pause my annoying voice and look it over. Lastly, I will say that at the end of each prompt, the researchers asked students to write what are called MEAL paragraphs, MEAL, and MEAL stands for Main Idea, Evidence, Analysis, and Link to Thesis. It's another mnemonic device which Dr. De La Paz is very fond of, being a former special ed teacher. So, let's talk about what happened. So, the sourcing, document analysis, and causal prompts were associated with higher student scores. The situated prompt had the lowest mean score of all the tasks. These results indicated that the writing prompts that centered on sourcing, corroboration of documents, and causation were more likely to focus attention on historical perspectives than the prompts that asked students to reimagine themselves as historical figures. Now, because so much of history relies on evidence-based thinking, these prompts that focus students directly on sources may be more likely to promote historical reasoning. And here you can see the mean scores for each prompt. I'm sorry, it's cutting it off at the top. It reads Table 7, Means and Standard Deviations for Historical Reasoning, element by writing prompt. And like earlier, it explains 31% of variance, and the overall historical quality of the writing was explained by the type of task. And these scholars have produced a body of work that indicates that the argumentative prompt is much better suited towards eliciting historical thinking. So you're going to hear the counter to that in week 5 when we listen to Dr. Sherry Colby, who's a narrative history writing expert. But this is a nice study. It's a nice piece of scholarship. When you look through the study, you'll see that it does give you some grounds for comparison. You want to look at the number of claims, the number of arguments, the amount of documents used in each source. These are the metrics that I ask my students to count up and apply. And I think it's a good habit to get into. It's a good metric. I guess it's a good tool for showing students where they are. So the background, or I guess the downside of this study was that students in most history classes merely write to summarize. So when most history teachers assign writing, the focus is on summarization. And because interpreting history is a metacognitive process that relies on reconciling multiple sources of evidence, this summarization focus actually inhibits historical reasoning. So making your students write a paper about what was World War II or describe what happened after World War I isn't as solid as an assignment that we would hope. The really solid assignments are the ones where the students have to answer a prompt that emphasizes corroboration, sourcing, and cause and effect analysis. So teachers really have to help these students understand historical writing as a form of argument, and you have to be able to pull facts out of a reading and deconstruct them and analyze them and interpret them. So lastly, we're going to take this to the discussion boards, and I'm going to ask you, how can teachers create prompts that emphasize corroboration, sourcing, and causal analysis, or cause and effect analysis, into their classroom practices. As always, you can go to the website, the blog, and you'll see which tasks improve historical reasoning. At the very bottom of the page, it has a link to the article, Using Writing Tasks to Elicit Adolescents' Historical Reasoning. You can download the article, you can read it. In your discussion board, please describe the grade level and subject that you teach. And what I'd really like to see you guys do is how can you apply this study to writing assignments that you will be using in the future. So, what subject would you do this in? What documents would you use? How would you scaffold it? How would you fine tune it? Put that out there and let's see how our community chimes in and suggests some ideas. Thank you once again very much for listening. Have a great evening, and I hope you are enjoying the course as much as I am. Take care.